Like all Icelandic people, she does a lot of things. I don't know how you have time for all that, but you are a CEO of STEF, the Performing Rights Society of Iceland. You're a Supreme Court attorney and even a guest lecturer at the University of Iceland. And on top of that, according to my information, you enjoy singing in a women's choir and are trying to learn how to play the guitar. So how do you get time for all this? Gudrún, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So just for clarification, STEF, the society, it's the same as KUDA in Denmark, TUNO in Norway, and STIM in Sweden, and Teosto in Finland. So I'm employed 100% by them. The rest is not really an occupation, you could say. I want to give you more of a practical view on ECLs. We've been, I think, today looking at ECL from a very academic point of view, which is all fair and good, but I think academic, their work should, though, of course, in the end, aiming at solving practical problems. Am I right? So I'm trying to give you more of a practical approach, how this is, how we deal with ECL from where I stand. So this is the recital 12 of the directive, of the CMO directive. We've already seen it today before, so I'm not going to dwell on it. It was just a reminder that, that this new CMO directive has a referral to ECL and says that it should not interfere with such agreements. And then my question is, but does it really, is this really the case? And just as a background, it is my view that the fragmentation of rights is a real threat to CMOs, especially smaller-sized CMOs. And maybe as a reminder that the biggest fragmentation of rights is taking place now by direct licensing for online use of big publishers and big CMOs, which are doing pan-European agreements. So we have some CMOs doing pan-European agreements for their repertoire to be used throughout the whole Europe, while other smaller-sized CMOs are only doing territorial agreements. So already there's a conflict. And it's my view also that the fragmentation of rights is not benefiting authors, actually on the contrary. And why do I say this? Just to give you an example. Do you think that a big publisher who has the publishing rights for a, so let's say, Norwegian author, did that big publisher, was it active in lobbying against the new Norwegian legislation, which was, we know that been postponed for the time being? No. And so I think that with the fragmentation of rights, it diminishes the possibilities of authors actually to guard their interest in, for instance, against or for legislations in their respective countries. And if we take it one step further, I think we might look at a scenario pretty soon where we have actually companies as Spotify becoming CMOs. If I were the CEO of Spotify, I would actually be thinking on those lines. If I already would have some tens of thousands of shops using Spotify business to business, why don't I encourage authors to withdraw their rights of background music from their CMOs and become a CMO in their own right? They say, well, we already have all those agreements with businesses. Let's just, I can also represent you when it comes to performing rights, and we'll skip all the middleman. I actually think that this is a scenario that we could see in the not so far away future. And this is also threatening. Do you think that Spotify then will be very active when it comes to sitting on committees in Finland, Sweden and Norway on copyright? I don't really think so, but I'm interested to hear your views on it if you have any later on. So, but fragmentation of rights is neither benefiting users in the long run. Users have difficulty finding information on who owns what rights. That will lead to uncertainty of rights, which rights are included in an agreement with a CMO. And in my view, an ECL agreement is a vehicle that could be used to safeguard non-fragmentation of rights, which would both benefit users and authors. So we've been talking a lot about opt-out of ECLs, and I'm going to continue on that line, maybe take it a step further. So what happens when a right holder wants to opt out of an ECL agreement? There are two scenarios, when the right holder is a member or when the right holder is not a member. When the right holder is a member, I can say that in those agreements that my society does with radio and television, for instance, we always insert a provision saying that our members can also opt out of those agreements and ban the use of their works. But interestingly enough, when we do agreements with, let's say, just an individual retail shop owner, there are no such opt-out clauses normally. And so agreements with retail shops also are confined with the repertoire that we actually represent. But when it comes to retail shops, if you can ask yourself, should there be a possibility for a member to opt out? Just from a practical point of view, it's impossible. Can a retail shop owner have a database of some members that have opted out? No, it's just too burdensome. And in fact, it's also too burdensome for a retail shop owner to actually look and see actually what repertoire falls under the agreement. And to actually do some research on, okay, I'm going to play this song. Is he a member of STEF or any other, sister societies that have mutual agreements with the society that I have agreement with? It's impossible as well. So actually, I think an ECL would be a perfect vehicle for just agreements with individual retail shop owners. And then you can say, well, that's not a mass user. That doesn't, shouldn't be used. An ECL agreement shouldn't be used for that. But how many songs do you think one shop will play during just one day? I think around 300. So 300 songs for 365 days. It's a mass user, isn't it? And then the interesting question is, we just heard this morning a view from Denmark that in the general possibility, the general ECL provision should only be used in a very specific cases, very specific agreements. But it would never work out if society as the one I work for would be to send each and every agreement with each and every retail shop to the ministry to get a stamp on it. So from a practical point of view, again, that interpretation would not work. So if I continue then on my slide, when I say the law states that both members and non-members can ban the use of their work, and I'm referring to the Icelandic law, and it varies a bit between the Nordics, I'm aware of that. But there is nothing in the Icelandic law, nor the other Nordic law, that precisely say specifically that non-members can conclude individual agreements, then with different prices, of course. On the contrary, the law states that it describes how non-members are bound by an ECL with the same terms, and it has then detailed provisions on how they can assert individual payments from a CMO. So, from my viewpoint, it's that the core of the ECL is that it is an agreement that is binding upon both members and non-members, and that non-members cannot conclude individual agreements with, for instance, other prices. But curiously enough, the literature on this is more on the other side. So what exists in literature, there are numerous articles that say that, well, no, you can opt out, but you can do more. You can, when you have opted out, you can actually conclude your own individual agreement. So I think that the people who have been speaking here today, who I think were not on the view that you can actually take that extra step and do an individual agreement once you've opted out, they should start to write more on ECL agreements. If we would agree on that statement that then right holder could opt out by just then resigning from a CMO and then do an individual agreement, in my view, there is no avtalslicens or there is no ECL. Then what you have really is just a choice by either be with a CMO and use their prices and their terms, or to do it on your own. And then you really, what you have is not an ECL, then you just have a frivilliga avtal, a freedom of contract. So I think that's the whole core of the system is not there anymore. And that such an interpretation, in my view, is not in conjunction with the national law. It goes beyond it. There is, however, a specific provision on the contrary in the Satellite and Cable Directive that Johan just showed us before. But this also, then the question comes up, have we entered the stage where individual licensing is practically feasible today? Do we really need CMOs? My view is that yes, we still do, and I think there's more and more use of works, and that they are still needed, and there's more and more use by individuals that have no possible practical way of actually seeing who is a member of a society or who has opted out, and what rights are within an agreement that they might do or have when they are using copyright protected works. And I think that an interpretation that you can opt out of an ECL and do an individual agreement instead will just further increase the fragmentation of rights. It will blur the scope of the license and makes licensing much more complicated, as I said, not only for right holders but also for users. So, why am I talking about this now? It has not really been such an issue. It's been more of a theoretical debate. But it's my view that now it's become a practical issue. And what has changed? It's the CMO directive that has changed this. And it's the presentation of the categories of rights. And it's a presentation or statements in Article 5 of the directive, which states that any right holder can withdraw from a collective management organizations any of his rights or any of the categories of rights. So the CMO directive is pushing right holders into withdrawing rights which they could not before. So now it becomes interesting. Now I think this whole ECL debate and this whole debate on opt-out or not and what are its implications, etc., and how you should interpret it, now it becomes a practical question. So what happens if a member decides to withdraw rights for a certain category only? He can always sign with a different CMO for those rights. That's not a problem. I can leave Coda and for maybe radio or something, and then I can just sign with Teosto instead for that category of rights. That's okay. We can solve that. That's possible. We will, though, of course, charge him more. Because that involves a lot more work for the societies, but it's doable. But can a right holder then decide that he will just withdraw from a certain category of rights and then do individual contracts with users within that category. The first question that arises is, okay, is he still a member? Yes, he's probably still a member of the society, even if he has withdrawn certain rights. He is a member, he still would be considered a member, or what? And the CMO directive states that members are to be able to grant licenses for non-commercial use. So can you then counter-argue from that and say, okay, that means that right holders that are members cannot grant commercial licenses, for instance, if they have withdrawn certain of their rights. And then you can say, well, he's a member only for certain rights and not that right that he withdrew, and then you have still another dilemma. I wanted to ask for remember, though, that these categories of rights are not that new. They were introduced by the Commission regarding GEMA in Germany in 1971. And since then, GEMA has provided its members of certain categories, but Germany did not have a Nordic ECL system in place. Okay. And the decision really didn't have much impact on other societies. No other societies, maybe the AKM in Austria, if I remember correctly, but they didn't follow suit. So the decision was there, but no other really European Union societies introduced categories of rights. So now the categories of rights are being introduced in all the EU and the EEA territories by the CMO directive, and which, as you remember, states that it should be compatible with ECL systems. So, but my question is it really then? And my conclusion is that now it has become imperative to start to discuss this and its implications on fragmentation of rights and the future of the ECL system. Thank you.